Okay, hello, and welcome to episode number 8 of Fast Casual's Landed's Fast Casual podcast, brought to you live today, Wednesday, August 9th, from a whole host of places this time, actually, from Charlotte, North Carolina, from New York City, and from the Emerald Isle, Ireland, as you can see behind me in the green lushness. My name is Alex Mann, and I'm your host again, and it's great to be back. As I like to say in every episode, every restaurant has a story. And so without further delay, I'd like to get this show on the road. I'm delighted to say that we have our CEO, Vivian Wang, here again today. I mean, she's always here. Say hi, Vivian.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here.
And she'll be chatting with Christie Cruz, the VP of Global Operations Excellence at Krispy Kreme. And boy, does she have quite the background. I'll tell you that. Christie, say hi.
Hey, team.
I suppose, Vivian, starting with you, do you want to give us a quick intro to remind people of who you are and what you do?
Yep. Great to see everyone. I am the founder and CEO of Landed. We help restaurants hire hourly workers, team members up to managers. So a lot of stuff going on right now on this topic. And I'm so thrilled to have Christie here today to talk about operations and hospitality. I mean, she's seen it all. So very excited for today's conversation.
Awesome. And Christie, obviously you're next up. Do you want to give us an introduction? I know you've had quite the journey, all the way from a crew member at McDonald's all the way to Krispy Kreme now. Do you want to give us a little bit about who you are?
Absolutely. So yeah, I love to always kind of start from the bottom. So, 16 years old, started at McDonald's, and really because one of my teammates that played basketball worked there and we thought it would be fun to work together. So that's where I really fell in love with the industry, worked my way up at McDonald's, and I was a store manager probably around 19 or 20 years old. Did that for a little bit and then made the jump over to RTM Restaurant Group, which was the largest franchisor of Arby's at the time, and kind of spent my 20s there, which it was just such a formative time for me as a person, and a great place to kind of polish me into more of a business leader and a P&L leader, and was able to do some multi-unit roles at Arby's, and made the jump over to kind of more strategy side when I did field training over at Crystal Restaurants. And that was the first time I kind of got out of in-depth field operations and more towards the training side of the business. And in 2016, I got moved into my first office role as the manager of learning and development at Crystal. And that's when I made the move to Atlanta, Georgia. And man, that transition from field, 15 years basically of field operations over to the office side of the business was quite a first 6 months and year. And I've been on the kind of, corporate office side of the business since then, and have learned a ton of how to really get both sides working in synergy together. And made some different pathways over there. So in Charlotte, North Carolina today with Krispy Kreme, and excited to be here.
Amazing. And I just listening to you there speak about going from the field to the corporate, and you quote saying it's quite a first year, and I can only imagine what sort of a difference the change and sort of experience that would be. Because it's funny, when we were talking in our pre-production meeting, that seemed to be the overarching sort of theme was your sort of evolution from the field into more of a corporate P&L focused leader, but then also having that name for yourself as that sort of go-to person for field operations within the organization. And I think it's probably a good place for us to kind of start or kick off the conversation, which is I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this that have MBA backgrounds, but no field experience, or people with field experience and no MBA backgrounds. And I'm probably incredibly curious to hear your point of view of that type of journey. And so my question to you is how does having that sort of field experience sort of give you an edge in what you do today? And how do you manage that sort of corporate, field operations balance? How do you strike that sort of harmony?
Absolutely. Great question. So I think, when I jumped into the corporate office role of running kind of a department on the corporate office side, I really set a team vision to be the bridge of the brand. And a bridge goes both ways, right? A bridge needs to unify, a bridge needs to support, and a bridge needs to maximize productivity. And you have to have that on the corporate side, but also on the field side. And I think what I realized in my first 6 months when I jumped into the corporate office side after being in meetings is, whoa, in the field, you have no idea all this is going on. You're thinking, oh man, what is this packet of, this new process that someone told me to do? It doesn't make sense to me. But, once I had that lens of sitting in meetings in the corporate office, like, oh, there's a reason why. There's bigger picture things going on here of why this X thing was implemented. But on the same token, on the office side, I really understood that, people in the office don't really understand the field either unless you've done that role. So I've always tried to really have both sides kind of help understand each other and have some empathy for each other in different ways. Now, I'll give you a good example. I've taken multiple marketing teams out into the field after an LTO gets rolled out because, marketing has this lens, and as they should, we got to push transactions, we got to grow sales. But their lens isn't necessarily how do we eliminate complexity for that end user field operator that is having to execute this really cool, really delicious LTO product. So having both sides kind of come together on that bridge is really important. But I'm a very physical person, so it's like, hey, you're never going to learn that from the office. I could put together a beautiful PowerPoint deck. You're not going to understand unless you go out and physically get into the restaurants, get into the shops,
totally,
and go do those things. So those are things I've always definitely tried to do.
And that's awesome because I feel like nowadays, people are spending more time in the field. I don't know if you've seen this trend, but we work with operators. Obviously, they're in the field every day, but we also work with a lot of the talent organizations, and even they are spending maybe for a new opening, especially, but even for existing locations, like they're going in, they're helping people interview, they're helping make sure that the trainings are happening in a standardized way. And I find that it's because, you have to be spending time with your employees, of course, and your operators, but also it's the quickest way to get feedback on what you're pushing out. And so I really like the okay, let's pilot it. Let's put you out in the field with the operators and get that real-time, unfiltered feedback, because it's not like an operator is going to sit down and write a beautiful email. Here are all my thoughts on this new process, right? So just sitting there side by side and doing that shadowing and learning is so important. I know there are some companies that we work with that actually make it mandatory for every single person sitting in maybe the support center, your HQ office, corporate, they have to go in and do actually a shift once a quarter. And they have to obviously they can't be maybe as useful as a seasoned team member. They probably don't know all the recipes. They can't do that. But, anyone can go in and help direct traffic, and help answer questions and maybe help with some of the cleanup work. And just kind of being around that helps you build empathy for the other team members.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Vivian. I think when you get in the water with them and show them, that you're willing to do that, it creates, a really cool relationship for sure. And yeah, Krispy Kreme and some other brands that I've worked at, whenever you are a new office person, you're to go out for a couple of shifts and physically work those positions. And that's huge into building, that bridge that we talked about. We did this really cool thing when I worked at Crystal Restaurants. My director of ops services led it. His name's Ralph, and he led this. We called it RSC, field training day, where every single person in the support center went out and worked a 6-hour shift out in a bunch of restaurants kind of near the support center. And what was really cool about that, the purpose is really to get the office people to understand the field, but the field employees loved it. They loved getting to know their accountant and getting to know their payroll person. And it really, paid dividends in big ways.
I love that. So, something that just popped into my mind as you were saying this, right? Having the field front of house team member get to know their accountant, which what other opportunity would they ever have to do that? Like, what do you think from an operational excellence perspective? Because you've seen this at many QSRs, also just like, you know, the entire hospitality industry as a whole. Like the word that pops into my head, well, I have two. One is like retention, and the second one is mentorship. So, like, you know, obviously they kind of go hand in hand. Like, what have you seen done well in this? Because keeping in mind, you know, the hourly worker average turnover rate is over 150%. So, like, you know, that's, even if you're better than everybody else, you're still probably looking at like 80%, 100% turnover. But how do you build that into like how you think about mentorship, how you think about retention in the field so that you're driving operational excellence?
No, great question. And I always kind of go back to two priorities that are hinge for me, and that's people and systems. And you have to have, you know, great people executing on great systems. But that mentorship program is so huge. I know, you know, for me, that this industry, I wish we could all change the perception, because it's such a cool industry for people that don't really know what they want to do when they grow up. I always say I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And like, it's just the perfect place for that, you know, to grow. And I know, you know, when I was 19 years old and someone approached me to become a store manager, I didn't see that in myself at all. And, you know, and it was the same thing when someone approached me to be, you know, multi-unit. I didn't really necessarily see that in myself either, but someone saw some potential. And along the way over my career, I've been really, really grateful to have some key people that saw that potential and then helped cultivate it and help teach me and help push me to be better. And that's not always comfortable, you know, and help challenge me to grow and to be uncomfortable with that growth. But I would never be where I am today if it wasn't for having those mentors. And some of them were structured and some of them were kind of ad hoc. So I think mentorship is definitely a huge piece of what can make this industry successful.
So what does like what are some of these more structured mentorship programs look like that you've seen work super well?
Yep. So through COVID, this new program was born kind of out of COVID by some industry leaders. And the program is called GLEAM, and it stands for the Global Leadership Enhancement and Mentorship Network. And I got involved with the program as a mentor at first through my University of Central Florida alma mater. And I was mentoring kind of restaurant majors. And I had over 3 mentees over the span of a couple of years. But the program also has a process for executives to be menteed. So I actually got to sign up and have a mentor for myself. So it's a really great process. I would urge everybody, if you don't have a structured mentorship program, go to the GLEAM website, and it's GLEAM. I'll have to put it in the show notes, but it's Global Leadership Enhancement and Mentorship Network. And if you Google that, it'll take you to their webpage, and they have really low cost structured opportunities for mentorship in this industry. It's been very impactful for me on both sides, as a mentor and as a mentee, and they will tell you how to do it, because it's got structure, it's got process, it's got, you know, the roles of each and kind of how those pieces of the puzzle come together. So I would urge everybody to check out GLEAM and see how it can impact their programs.
Oh, that's cool. That's my first time hearing about it. So, I mean, that's something that we'll definitely recommend to. We hear from so many different groups, like, you know, how do we think about retention, right? And mentorship, and you know, you have some folks in the field who are going to just take it upon themselves, right? Kind of like that ad hoc that you mentioned, but not always is that the case. And it's like, how can you kind of guarantee that level of just like camaraderie in the field versus just having some standout like managers who just take it upon themselves? So that's really cool.
It's also been a key topic I think we've heard from a lot of leaders like yourself, Christie, talking about how to design sort of mentorship programs for people within sort of like franchises, and how do they graduate to like potentially even owning franchises? How do you like clearing a path to the point you're making about not even realizing that it could be something for you, or that you had it in you to be a leader in the restaurant business. And we hear that time and time again. So to your point about adding Gleam to our show notes, of course we will do that. And we'll actually add that link to the bottom of our podcast as well when we send it out afterwards, because it does sound like an amazing program. And it sounds like you're an incredible advocate for it as well. Do you roll the program out to the people you work with, like the people who report to you, for example? Do you involve them in the program as well? Or is it really like a personal point of pride for you?
So definitely both. I'm pretty new with Krispy Kreme, so I haven't gotten it entrenched here yet. I'm definitely in like observation assessment mode. But with my team, especially my team at Crystal, I had every single person that was a report of mine and on my team, I set them up with Gleam and signed them up to be a mentee and have their own mentor. Because, the other thing too is your boss can't always give you the right conversations that you need to be steered. There's certain things that maybe you don't want to discuss with your boss, and having a sounding board that is not even in your company that you can trust and things aren't going anywhere is huge. And I think, that piece is important for me to build with my team and across for sure.
And I have a question about something that you just talked about, which is people and systems, right? So every single company, you've been at so many different brands, and they're all very big ones, but they all kind of have their own way to approach things. From a systems perspective, maybe like the way that they codify their values and their culture. So like, how have you thought, like when you come into like a new environment, and this is actually very relevant to you right now, like how do you think about what people and systems mean? Is this like a one size fits all, or is it like, how do you kind of adapt that to the company and the brand and the history that you join?
No, great question. I'm literally living it right now.
Yep.
I think there's some inherent principles that I have a lens for, inherent principles that I learned from McDonald's and Arby's both. I think I was really lucky to be the end user of some really great systems at both those places. So things that come to mind from there that I want to instill no matter where I am is the design thinking methodology, which is the end user in mind, where management thinking is me, right? Usually managers are like, how does this help me? Where when you have a design thinking brain, it's more about the end user. So putting the end user at the forefront first, and then thinking, what are ways that we can eliminate complexity for them? How do we make things more intuitive for them? Because at the end of the day, we want them to execute on a great guest experience. And the more complexity we add, the tougher it is for them at the end of the day to do that. And then, going back to your retention thing, if we make it really hard to do the job, it's going to be really hard to retain good talent, because they know I'm going to be able to go do it somewhere else easier. And the example I always love to talk about that illustrates this for me, when I worked at McDonald's, it was in the 90s. And I remember being 16, 17 years old in the late 90s. And it was when McDonald's went through this big evolution in their kitchen of how they made food. So they went to this made for you platform, completely revolutionized the back of house. And this was the 90s. I didn't go to a webinar. I didn't have this like long drawn out, processor meetings and all these things. When we opened up the boxes and we put everything in place, everything made sense. Everything had a home. Everything was intuitive. Everything flowed. So now, me being on this side of the fence, I have so much admiration for whoever the people were on the McDonald's support center that put together that project, because they made it intuitive. They eliminated complexity, and they allowed the end user to execute without a lot of fluff. So that always is an example that I have in my head whenever I approach, any process or procedure or any changes in any brand I've been at.
I love that. I mean, the mental image that comes to mind for me is like paint by the numbers. Like you see these gorgeous like masterpieces, and then you just have like a set of paints and the numbers, and anyone can do it, right? And
Exactly.
like no one's reading an instruction manual, no one's doing like a web.
Right.
Like I think that sometimes, and this is not just like the hospitality and not our industry. It's like all in like so many industries that we see. Like sometimes you like just creating more material feels like you're solving a problem, but in reality, like kind of embodying that design thinking is really how you're going to actually have something stick. Because a manager, so like someone sitting in the support center, shouldn't be really evaluated on like how much they output, like in terms of physical materials, but rather how much of it actually like drives like a certain metric. So like maybe it's an adoption metric, maybe it could be like, like a line, like, how long the lines are. It could be some like, pace of service. It could be revenue. It could be any of those things.
Exactly.
But it definitely should not be like, oh, how many webinars, how many of these did you hold? Like how many people did you deliver a material to? Because those don't necessarily end up like sticking. We see that all the time. And so part of like when we're rolling out Landed, for example, with some of our clients, we do a tutorial, but really the tutorial is like, it's more about like a Q&A. It's like a lot of the time you need to have like an opportunity for someone to talk to a live person and get like some live help. And that's why we've spent like so much time like building out integrations, because it's not about you learning a new system. It's about you've already spent probably years trying to figure out like just one system. Like how do we integrate with whatever that is and making that easier, rather than saying, okay, well, great, there's this other shiny, amazing object for you to learn and you're going to love it. Because as a manager, maybe, yes, you think folks will love it, but really as like the end user and the field employees, they're like, I'm just trying to like, service our guests. And that's already, sometimes challenging. Given their now third-party deliveries that they have to be managing. And there's that whole Starbucks thing that we've heard, where you walk in and everyone's running around and you're the first person in line and it takes like 10 minutes to take your order because they're running around with their third-party delivery apps, like, pumping in orders. So that totally resonates, and we hear it a lot.
For sure. So many more channels today than ever before. It's a whole new world out there for sure.
I think it's interesting as well that you actually reference design thinking it as a sort of ideology for improving sort of business in restaurants, because frankly, I've never heard design thinking used in like a restaurant context ever. Context here, I actually worked as a innovation design consultant in this very space years ago. Yeah. Like inventing new products and services. And I had never even thought about it, thinking about it from a restaurant perspective at all. And the fact that you sound so like fluent and sound so cogent speaking about it, I think speaks wonders to the fact that you come from a background where you were already in that space. I think, when you talked about earlier about being your go-to person in a lot of your previous jobs, like, oh, Christie she was in the field, like she knows what those people want. I feel like to the point I was like, or to the first comment I made at the very beginning, where it's like, it gives you an edge. I feel like having that type of experience much more so than coming in off the back of an MBA. Not that I wanted to ride an MBA for anybody, but I mean, in the context of like, I feel like the way you're speaking about like the problem solving here, like for guest experience, using something like design thinking is all as much informed by your own personal experience as much as it is probably like the way you've educated yourself, presumably in university or from your own reading.
Absolutely. I'm definitely a lifelong learner. A couple years ago, I went through like Brene Brown's values exercise, which was a really cool exercise, by the way. And through that exercise, the two values that came out, because you have to whittle it down from like this huge list, was love and learning. And I'm definitely, kind of been a lifelong learner. So I am actually in the middle of an executive MBA program right now. at the University of Georgia. And, working with the Glean program really kind of helped motivate me to get back into school to put all these pieces together. Because I do think, there is the practical application of being in the field and having that experience. An MBA cannot, they can't replicate that, right? But having that and getting, some more formal education has really helped to kind of polish things for me in a more conducive approach and to be a little bit more intentional about it. But so I think having both really, really helps versus having just all one or the other.
Totally. I mean, like, I suppose in one sense, like, what would you recommend to people who are hearing this that are store managers, area managers that would look up to you almost or see you as like, wow, you're almost like an alien. You've done so well. Like, how would you recommend them make that bridge to, like, say, where you are today?
Yeah, first I would say in whatever role that you're in right now, be a high performer. I always tell my team, like, be the MVP of wherever you are. Like, don't lose sight of where you're at, trying to get to where you're going. So really, and here it's funny, it's called at Krispy Kreme, we have this thing called the leadership mix, which is like all of our values. And master the craft is one of them. And that really speaks to me. Like, master your craft, be the MVP of whatever you're learning. And then figure out, because school's not for everybody. Like, I have I quit school. I quit my bachelor program when I got promoted to be a McDonald's general manager, because at that stage in my life, with the way that I grew up, I thought I had made it in life. I'm like, yeah, you're going to give me medical insurance and you're going to pay me $30-something thousand a year. Yeah, I don't need this school thing. So I did go back later and finish. And I wouldn't have had it any other way, but you really got to decide where you are, kind of in your life and what you need. But don't lose sight of where you are currently because of where you're going. And then decide, because school's not for everybody. Can you self-learn with books? And, nowadays everything is at your fingertips with podcasts, and I have an Audible subscription. So, I'm always reading, different books that also add that kind of layer, because school is pricey, and I'm going to be driving my Honda Civic for a long time to pay for this MBA. So sometimes you have to make sacrifices depending on what you want and hitting your goals. So, be patient, and, if you're focusing on people and systems for yourself as well, not just for whatever organization you're in, you can definitely win through those two pieces.
I love that. People and systems. I mean, truly, it's and to over index on one or the other, like, doesn't work either for scaling, I think. And I mean, I know that we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you about the people piece, because we have so we talked a little bit about systems, how to think about like the design thinking and how you structure those. But on the people side, like, how do you decide who to hire, like, for your teams? Like, what are you looking for in the people? So, once they're in with you, you want them to master their craft. That makes sense. But what about, like, deciding, like, who to bring on in the first place?
No, that's a great question. And, for me, you got to have some level of competence in whatever the role is, right? So those, some of that, but most of those skills can really be taught. So, for me, I'm really looking for those behaviors. And is it someone who is, number one, this industry, you got to have a good work ethic to make it in this industry. So, is it someone who's going to come in, have a good work ethic, but also have a growth mindset, and be a person that is going to come with solutions and a growth mindset when it comes to challenges, because you get challenges thrown at you every single day in this industry. And you've got to be able to approach them with a growth mindset and know that you can tackle the problem and figure it out together as a team and be collaborative. And, low egos, we have to work as a team. So I would say the behaviors are more important than the skills, because most of those technical skills can definitely be taught.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that reminds me of like something that Danny Meyer says. He calls it the 51%. 51% is the emotional intelligence, and then the 49% is the technical, but they're always looking for the 51% of like that aptitude in the first place, and like the willingness and the enthusiasm. So love that. Thank you so much, Christy. I mean, my big takeaway from this is 2 words: people and systems. Like, think about where you are with each of them. And you don't lose sight of one, don't over index on one or the other. Like, they're both super important in order to drive operational excellence, which happens to be Christy's specialty.
Absolutely. This was a great conversation. I appreciate, Alex, appreciate your focus on this, and Vivian as well. It's been a great conversation.
No, great. Thank you for coming. Like, we really appreciate it. I mean, so much insight here crammed into these 30 minutes. Like, we're like literally cramming it in. So I really appreciate it. And I suppose one last thing before you go, Christy, is if there was 30 minutes here, what's the most key takeaway for the whole episode? If you were to impart one piece of wisdom.
Yeah, no, focus on people. Focus on systems. If you don't have a mentorship program or a mentor of your own, go to the Gleam site. It will change your life.
All right. Well, that's so well said. So succinct. I appreciate that so much. And with that, that's it. We're at the end of the podcast. Like I say every week, every restaurant has a story. And we're delighted to have somebody like Christy here to learn from her, to learn her sort of playbook that builds like the world's best restaurants, and how anybody listening can apply them as a founder, owner, operator, or investor themselves. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you all next week.